The morning sun painted golden streaks across the glass towers of downtown Manhattan as Cassandra Monroe pushed her recycling cart along Fifth Avenue. Her worn gloves gripped the handles tightly while her practiced eyes scanned the sidewalks for discarded bottles and cans. At 26, she had perfected the rhythm of this work. Each step, each collection, each sorted item represented survival in a city that rarely noticed people like her. Cass paused beside a overflowing public bin, pulling out aluminum cans with efficient movements. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes bore the honest stains of hard work. She hummed softly, a habit that made the long hours pass more quickly. The morning rush of business professionals flowed around her like water around a stone, barely acknowledging her presence. She had learned to be invisible. It made the work easier when people looked through you rather than at you. But invisibility also meant freedom. Nobody expected anything from someone they did not see. Nobody judged. Nobody interfered. Cass had built a simple life within these boundaries, and most days that felt like enough. Across the street, Theodore Ashford sat in his silver sports car, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. His morning had started with another reminder about Victoria's engagement party. The elegant invitation mocked him from the passenger seat, printed on expensive cardstock that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. 3 months since their breakup, and she was already marrying Julian Price of all people, his former business partner. The betrayal still tasted bitter. Theo ran a hand through his dark hair, jaw clenched with frustration. Attending the party would be humiliating. Not attending would seem cowardly. Either way, Victoria won. She always did. The woman had turned manipulation into an art form, and he had been blind to it for 2 years. Now she wanted to parade her victory in front of everyone they knew. He needed to make a statement. He needed to show up with someone who would prove he had moved on completely. But who? His social circle was intertwined with Victoria's. Any woman he asked would either be connected to his ex or would assume the invitation meant more than it did. Theo was tired of games and expectations. He wanted something real, even if real meant hiring someone for one evening. The car felt suffocating. Theo shifted into gear and pulled forward, searching for a parking spot where he could clear his head. He spotted an opening near the corner and smoothly maneuvered the vehicle into position. The engine purred to silence. He leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to calm the anger that had been his constant companion for months. Then came the sound. A sharp, metallic crack that made him bolt upright. His eyes flew open just in time to see an aluminum can bouncing off his pristine hood, leaving a visible scratch across the paint. Theo's mouth fell open in disbelief. He threw open the door and stepped out, staring at the damage with mounting fury. Near the sidewalk, Cass froze. She had been tossing sorted cans into her cart when one slipped from her grip at exactly the wrong angle. The can had sailed through the air like a tiny missile, finding its target with devastating accuracy. She looked at the expensive car, then at the tall, well-dressed man emerging from it, and felt her stomach sink. "Are you serious right now?" Theo's voice carried across the space between them, sharp with incredulity. He pointed at the scratch as if presenting evidence at a trial. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Cass straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated despite the obvious difference in their circumstances. "It was an accident. I apologize." "An accident?" Theo strode toward her, gesturing at his car. "That vehicle costs more than most people earn in a year. And you just threw garbage at it." "It was a recyclable aluminum can, not garbage," Cass corrected automatically, then immediately regretted the clarification. This was not the time for environmental education. "Look, I said I'm sorry. What else do you want from me?" Theo stopped, a few feet away, studying her with sharp blue eyes. "I want compensation. That scratch will cost hundreds to repair. Cass pulled off her gloves and crossed her arms. I don't have hundreds. I barely have dozens. But if you give me your information, I'll pay you back when I can. Something in her direct gaze caught him off guard. No excuses, no pleading, just honest acknowledgement of reality. Theo found himself reassessing the situation. She was probably around his age, maybe younger. Her face showed the kind of strength that came from facing challenges daily, and there was a spark in her eyes that spoke of intelligence and pride. An idea formed in his mind. Crazy, impulsive, possibly brilliant. Actually, Theo said slowly, there might be another way you could settle this debt. Cass's eyes narrowed with immediate suspicion. I'm not interested in whatever you're thinking. It's not what you think, he said quickly, raising his hands. I need a date for an event. One evening, completely professional. You accompany me, help me make an impression, and we call it even. She stared at him like he had suggested flying. To the moon. You want me to be your date? To what kind of event? An engagement party. My ex-fiancée is marrying someone I used to work with, and showing up alone would be pathetic. But arriving with someone interesting would send a clear message that I've moved on. Cass looked down at her worn work clothes, then back at him. You realize what I do for a living, right? I collect recycling. I sort trash. I'm not exactly engagement party material. That's actually perfect, Theo insisted, warming to the idea. You're real. You're unexpected. You're exactly the opposite of what everyone would expect me to bring. So I'm your statement piece? Your way of thumbing your nose at high society? Cass shook her head. That sounds humiliating for both of us. Theo softened his approach. Look, I understand your hesitation, but think about it practically. One evening of pretending to tolerate my company in exchange for clearing your debt. And I'll pay you on top of that, $5,000. The number hit Cass like physical force. $5,000 would change everything. New equipment for her work. Rent paid months in advance. The ability to save for the business idea that kept her awake at night. She studied the stranger, in front of her, trying to assess if this was legitimate or some elaborate setup. Why would you pay that much just to make your ex jealous? She asked bluntly. Theo considered the question, because watching her face when I walk in with someone she never expected would be worth every penny. Because I'm tired of playing by her rules, and because maybe I want to prove to myself that there's more to life than the shallow circles I've been running in. Cass heard the genuine frustration beneath his words. This was not just about revenge. This man was searching for something he had lost, maybe something he never had. She recognized that hunger because she felt it too. The desire to be seen as more than your circumstances. The need to prove your worth to yourself, not just others. Ruby was going to think she had lost her mind. Her best friend would probably lecture her for an hour about the dangers of getting involved with rich men and their problems. But $5,000, that was not just money. That was possibility. One evening, Cass said firmly, I show up, I play the part, I leave. No other expectations, no extensions, no complications. Theo extended his hand. One evening. You have my word. She shook his hand, noting the smooth skin that had never known manual labor. I'm Cassandra, Cass, and you should know I'm terrible at pretending to be someone I'm not. Theodore. Theo. And good. I don't want you to be anyone else. I just need you to be yourself while wearing a nice dress. Cass released his hand and turned back to her cart. This is absolutely insane. Probably, Theo agreed, unable to suppress a slight smile. But boring is overrated. As Cass pushed her cart down the sidewalk, she glanced back once to see Theo still standing by his car, examining the scratch with a bemused expression. What had she just agreed to? One evening could not possibly change anything significant. It was just a job, a strange performance for money she desperately needed. But something in her chest felt lighter than it had in months. Maybe it was the prospect of financial relief. Maybe it was the curiosity about glimpsing a world completely foreign to her own. Or maybe it was the way Theo had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but directly at her, as if she was worth seeing. Cass shook her head, dismissing the thought. This was business, nothing more. She would play dress-up for a few hours, collect her payment, and return to real life. Simple, straightforward. No complications. She had no way of knowing that the collision between their two worlds had set in motion something neither of them could control. The scratch on that expensive car was nothing compared to the impact their meeting would have on both their lives. But for now, ignorance felt safer than hope. The city continued its endless rhythm around them, indifferent to the deal just struck, on a random corner. Cass returned to collecting recyclables, and Theo drove away to begin planning for the engagement party that would change everything. One evening. That was all it was supposed to be. 3 days passed before Theo contacted Cass again. She had almost convinced herself the entire encounter had been some bizarre daydream when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was direct and businesslike, providing an address in the upscale shopping district and a time Saturday, 10 a.m. Cass stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She could still back out. She could ignore the message and return to her predictable routine. But the memory of that $5,000 promise kept her finger moving across the keyboard. She confirmed the appointment. Saturday morning arrived, with unseasonable warmth. Cass showered carefully, washing away the week's grime and anxiety. She chose her best jeans and a clean sweater, knowing they would look shabby compared to whatever surrounded her at the address Theo had provided. Ruby had spent the previous evening interrogating her about every detail of the arrangement, oscillating between excitement and concern. "Just promise me you'll keep your phone on," Ruby had insisted, gripping Cass's hands. "And if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. Rich people can be dangerous when they think they own you." Cass had promised, though she felt more curious than frightened. There was something about Theo's frustrated honesty that suggested he was more lost than threatening. Besides, this was Manhattan in broad daylight. What could possibly go wrong in a shopping district? The address led her to an exclusive boutique with windows displaying elegant dresses that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Cass hesitated outside, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. A doorman in a crisp uniform smiled and held the door open, treating her with the same courtesy he would show any customer. The small gesture steadied her nerves. She stepped inside. The interior was all cream marble and soft lighting. Classical music played quietly from hidden speakers. Theo stood near a curved sofa, speaking with a woman whose perfectly styled hair and tailored suit screamed professional authority. He looked up as Cass entered, and his expression shifted from concentration to something warmer. "Cass, you made it," he said, crossing the space between them. "This is Diana Marsh. She's going to help with your wardrobe for the party." Diana extended a hand, her smile genuine despite the obvious appraisal in her eyes. "Cassandra? Lovely. To meet you. Theo has told me very little, which makes this assignment wonderfully mysterious. Shall we get started?" Cass shook her hand, impressed by the firm grip. "I should warn you, I have no idea what I'm doing here." "Perfect," Diana replied with a conspiratorial wink. "The best transformations start with complete honesty. Come with me." The next hour became a whirlwind of fabrics, colors, and styles that made Cass's head spin. Diana moved through the boutique with practiced efficiency, pulling dresses from racks and holding them up against Cass's frame. She asked questions about comfort, about confidence, about what made Cass feel like herself. Unlike the patronizing makeover scenes from movies, Diana seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than imposing. "This one," Diana declared, holding up a deep burgundy dress with clean lines and subtle elegance. "Try this first." Cass disappeared into a spacious changing room, grateful for a moment alone to process everything. She slipped out of her worn clothes and carefully pulled on the dress. The fabric felt like water against her skin, expensive and foreign. She turned to face the mirror and barely recognized the reflection staring back. The dress transformed her silhouette without erasing who she was. It emphasized the strength in her shoulders, the curve of her waist, the confidence in her posture. Cass touched the fabric hesitantly, half expecting the image to shatter like an illusion. But it remained solid, real, undeniably her. "Let's see," Diana called from outside. Cass stepped through the curtain, immediately self-conscious. Theo had been scrolling through his phone but looked up at her entrance. His expression froze. For several heartbeats, nobody spoke. Diana smiled knowingly, but Theo seemed incapable of forming words. "Well?" Cass asked, breaking the silence. "Is this engagement party appropriate?" "It's stunning," Theo managed, his voice rougher than usual. "You look absolutely stunning." Heat crept up Cass's neck. She was not accustomed to compliments, especially not delivered with such obvious sincerity. "It's just a dress." "It's not just anything," Diana corrected gently. "That dress was made for you. We'll take it." They tried several more options, but kept returning to the burgundy dress. Diana added coordinating shoes with reasonable heels that Cass could actually walk in, along with a simple clutch and minimal jewelry. Throughout the process, Theo watched from his position on the sofa, occasionally offering opinions, but mostly just observing with an intensity that made Cass increasingly aware of his presence. When Diana stepped away to arrange the purchases, Cass sat beside Theo, maintaining a careful distance. "This feels excessive. One dress would have been sufficient." "Diana knows what she's doing," Theo replied. "Trust the process." "I don't trust processes that involve spending thousands of dollars on clothes I'll wear once." Theo turned to face her more fully. "What would you do with $5,000? If you had it right now, what's the first thing you'd spend it on?" The question caught Cass off guard. She considered lying, offering some practical answer about rent or savings. But something about the genuine curiosity in his expression pulled the truth from her. "I'd invest in equipment for a recycling education program. Mobile sorting stations, educational materials, maybe a small vehicle to transport everything. I want to teach people about proper recycling, about how their small choices matter. Most people throw everything away because nobody taught them there's a better option." Theo's eyes widened slightly. "You want to start a business?" "I want to make a difference," Cass corrected. "The business part would just make it sustainable. Right now I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone fund a dream." "That's remarkable," Theo said softly. "Most people I know only think about making money for its own sake." "You're thinking about impact." Cass shrugged, uncomfortable with the admiration in his voice. "It's just an idea. Probably impossible." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Theo replied. "But impossible and difficult are not the same thing," Diana returned, with several elegant bags efficiently ending the moment. She provided Cass with instructions for hair and makeup, along with a business card for a salon that would prepare her the day of the party. As they concluded the appointment, Diana pulled Cass aside while Theo took a phone call. "He's a good man," Diana said quietly. "Wounded, but good. Whatever this arrangement is between you two, be patient with him, and with yourself." Cass wanted to clarify that this was purely transactional, but something in Diana's knowing smile suggested explanation would be pointless. Instead, she simply thanked her and followed Theo out to the street. They walked in silence for a block before Theo spoke. "Are you hungry? There's a cafe nearby that makes excellent sandwiches." Cass checked her phone, seeing several missed calls from Ruby. "I should probably get back." "Right, of course," Theo said quickly, though disappointment flickered across his features. "The party is Friday evening. I'll send a car for you at 6. "I can take the subway. Cass, you'll be wearing an expensive dress and heels. Let me send a car, please." She recognized this was not the battle to fight. "Fine, a car at 6. Theo handed her a card with his personal number. "Call if you need. Anything before then." "And Cass, thank you for agreeing to this insanity." She pocketed the card and met his gaze directly. "You're paying me well for one evening of my time. No thanks necessary." Something in her tone created distance between them, a reminder of the transactional nature of their arrangement. Theo nodded slowly, recognizing the boundary she was establishing. They parted ways at the corner, Cass heading toward the subway, while Theo remained standing on the sidewalk, watching her disappear into the crowd. The week that followed felt surreal. Cass continued her normal routine, pushing her cart through familiar streets, but her mind kept drifting to Friday evening. Ruby insisted on helping her prepare, treating the entire situation like an adventure rather than a job. On Thursday evening, they practiced walking in the new heels, with Cass stumbling around Ruby's tiny apartment while her friend offered encouragement and criticism in equal measure. "You're thinking too hard," Ruby observed, lounging on her worn sofa. "Just walk like you normally do, but on your toes." "That's terrible advice," Cass muttered, wobbling dangerously. "How do women wear these torture devices regularly?" "Practice and determination. Also, the knowledge that they look amazing." Cass completed a successful lap around the coffee table without incident. "I still think this whole thing is ridiculous. Playing dress up so some rich guy can make his ex jealous." "Maybe," Ruby agreed. "Or maybe it's your chance to see how the other half lives. When else are you going to attend a fancy engagement party?" "Never, hopefully. Once is more than enough." But, despite her protests, Cass felt a flutter of anticipation she could not quite suppress. Part of her was curious about Theo's world, about the people who moved through life with such casual wealth. Another part wondered about Theo himself. Who was he beneath the expensive clothes and wounded pride? What had his ex-fiancée done to hurt him so deeply that he needed this elaborate performance? Friday arrived with gray skies that threatened rain. Cass finished her route early, rushing home to shower and prepare. The salon appointment was at 3, giving her plenty of time, but also leaving her alone with mounting nervousness. She tried, calling Ruby for distraction, but her friend was working a double shift and could not talk. The salon experience was simultaneously relaxing and surreal. Patient stylists washed and arranged her hair into soft waves that framed her face. The makeup artist enhanced her features without making her look like someone else. When they finally finished, Cass studied her reflection with wonder. She looked polished, elegant, but still fundamentally herself. The transformation had revealed rather than concealed. Back home, she carefully dressed in the burgundy gown, fastened the simple necklace Diana had selected, and slipped on the heels. A text from Theo arrived at precisely 6. "Car is outside. No pressure, but you're going to be amazing." Cass grabbed the clutch, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs. A sleek black car waited at the curb, the driver opening the door with professional courtesy. She slid into the leather interior, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. The drive to the venue took 30 minutes through evening traffic. Cass watched the city transform from her familiar working-class neighborhood to increasingly affluent areas. When the car finally stopped, she recognized the building immediately, the Grand Lexington Hotel. She had been here dozens of times, but always through the service entrance, always invisible. Tonight, she would walk through the front doors. Tonight, she would be seen. The driver opened her door and Cass stepped out onto the red carpet that led to the entrance. Cameras flashed from photographers stationed along the route. Her instinct was to cover her face, but she forced herself to walk steadily forward, channeling every ounce of confidence she possessed. Theo waited just inside the lobby, devastatingly handsome in a tailored black suit. His eyes found her the moment she entered, and the smile that transformed his face made her temporarily forget how to breathe. He crossed to her quickly, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. "You clean up reasonably well yourself," Cass replied, grateful her voice remained steady. He laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Ready to face the wolves?" "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked together toward the ballroom, and Cass felt the weight of curious stares following their progress. She kept her chin up, her expression calm, drawing on reserves of strength she had developed through years of being invisible. If she could be overlooked, she could also choose to be seen. The power was the same, just differently directed. The ballroom doors opened before them, revealing a glittering world of crystal chandeliers, elegant guests, and carefully orchestrated perfection. Theo squeezed her arm gently, a gesture of reassurance and solidarity. They stepped forward together, crossing the threshold into a world that would never be quite the same for either of them. One evening, that was still the agreement. But as they entered the party, Cass could not shake the feeling that she had just stepped off a cliff, and there was no way to know where she would land. The ballroom sparkled like a scene from a dream that cost someone's annual salary to create. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light across tables draped in ivory silk. Enormous floral arrangements of white roses and orchids dominated every surface, their perfume mingling with expensive cologne and champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the elegant music barely audible above the murmur of conversation from the 200 guests scattered throughout the space. Cass felt her breath catch as they paused just inside the entrance. This was not merely a party. This was a theatrical production designed to broadcast wealth, taste, and social superiority. Every detail had been calculated for maximum impact, from the gold-rimmed champagne flutes to the subtle lighting that made everyone look slightly more beautiful than reality allowed. "Still breathing?" Theo whispered, his hand settling lightly on the small of her back. "Barely," Cass admitted, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "How many people are here?" "Too many, but most of them are harmless. They'll ask polite questions, make shallow observations, and forget you exist by tomorrow." "Comforting." Theo smiled. "The trick is not caring what they think. You're here because I invited you, and their opinions are irrelevant." A server approached with a tray of champagne. Theo took 2 glasses, handing one to Cass. She accepted it with a small nod of thanks, noting how the server's eyes slid past her as if she were part of the furniture. Old habits. In this hotel, she had always been invisible. The cognitive dissonance of being treated as a guest rather than staff created a strange vertigo. They moved deeper into the room, and Cass became aware of the attention following them. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. A woman in a glittering silver gown whispered to her companion behind a raised hand. The scrutiny felt like physical pressure against her skin. "They're staring," Cass murmured. "Let them stare. You're the most interesting person in this room. I'm the most out-of-place person in this room." "Same thing," Theo replied with a grin. "Come on, let's find somewhere to stand where I can pretend I'm enjoying myself." They positioned themselves near one of the floral arrangements, providing a strategic view of the room while offering a barrier against immediate approach. Cass sipped her champagne, the bubbles tickling her nose. The drink was dry and crisp, tasting of money she could never justify spending. She forced herself to take small sips, aware that nervousness and alcohol made a dangerous combination. Across the ballroom, a vision in white approached. Victoria Sinclair moved through the crowd like a swan through still water, her designer gown flowing behind her with calculated grace. Her blonde hair was swept into an intricate updo that probably required 2 hours and a professional stylist. Diamond earrings caught the light with every movement of her head. She was objectively beautiful in the way of carefully curated perfection, but her eyes held a coldness that no amount of makeup could disguise. Beside her walked Julian Price, tall and distinguished with silver threading through his dark hair. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture radiating confidence and self-satisfaction. He held Victoria's hand possessively, a territorial gesture that seemed designed more for observers than for her. "They've spotted us," Theo said quietly, his body tensing. "Here we go." Victoria's trajectory shifted, bringing her directly toward them. Her smile was brilliant and entirely artificial, the kind of expression that never reached the eyes. Julian followed slightly behind, his gaze assessing Cass with unconcealed curiosity. "Theodore!" Victoria's voice rang out, pitched perfectly to carry to nearby guests. "What a delightful surprise! I was afraid you might not come." "Wouldn't miss it," Theo replied smoothly. "Congratulations on your engagement." Victoria's eyes flickered to Cass, conducting a rapid evaluation that took in every detail from shoes to hairstyle. "And who is this charming guest?" "Cassandra Monroe," Cass introduced, herself before Theo could speak, extending her hand. "It's lovely to meet you." Victoria's handshake was brief and limp, conveying disinterest through minimal contact. "Monroe, I don't believe I know that family. Are you from New York?" The question was designed to establish social hierarchy, to determine which circles Cass moved in and whether they intersected with Victoria's world. Cass recognized the trap immediately. Any honest answer would expose her working-class background, confirming Victoria's obvious assumption that she did not belong here. "Born and raised," Cass replied, deliberately vague. "The city has always been home." Julian stepped forward, his smile more genuine than Victoria's, but no less calculated. "And how do you and Theodore know each other? I don't recall seeing you at any of our usual gatherings." "We met by chance," Theo interjected. "Sometimes the best connections happen when you're not looking for them." Victoria's laugh was high and brittle. "How wonderfully romantic. Random, chance, like a fairy tale." "More interesting than most fairy tales," Cass said calmly. "Those tend to be rather predictable." Something sharp flashed in Victoria's eyes, recognition that Cass was not going to play the intimidated outsider. She adjusted her strategy, her smile becoming sweeter and therefore more dangerous. "Cassandra, you simply must tell me what you do. Theodore always surrounds himself with such accomplished people." The moment of truth. Cass felt Theo shift beside her, ready to intervene, but she held up a subtle hand. This was her answer to give. She met Victoria's gaze directly, refusing to look away. "I work in waste management and recycling," Cass said clearly. "I help businesses and individuals properly sort and dispose of recyclable materials. It's important work that most people don't think about." The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but felt eternal. Victoria's expression cycled through surprise, disdain, and calculation before settling on patronizing sympathy. Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. Nearby guests, who had been eavesdropping, exchanged meaningful glances. "How admirable," Victoria finally managed, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "It's so important to have people doing that sort of work. Someone has to, after all." "Exactly," Cass agreed, refusing to acknowledge the insult. "Just like someone has to plan elaborate parties and wear expensive dresses. We all contribute in our own ways." Theo coughed to cover a laugh. Julian's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. Victoria's smile became glacial. "Well, I should circulate," Victoria said abruptly. "So many guests to greet. Enjoy the party, Theodore! Cassandra!" She swept away with Julian in tow, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. The moment they were out of earshot, Theo turned to Cass with undisguised admiration. "That was magnificent. The way you just disarmed her completely." Cass released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Was it too much? I probably should have been more diplomatic." "Are you kidding? That was perfect. Victoria expected you to be embarrassed or apologetic. Instead, you owned who you are and made her look petty for trying to shame you." "She's going to hate me now." "She was always going to hate you. At least, this way you maintained your dignity." They were interrupted by the approach of an older couple, friends of Theo's family who wanted introductions. Then came a business associate, followed by a distant cousin, followed by a parade of curious guests drawn by the novelty of Theo's unexpected companion. Cass handled each interaction with growing confidence, discovering that honesty was her greatest asset. When people asked what she did, she told them. When they seemed uncomfortable with her answer, she simply moved the conversation forward without apology. Not everyone responded with judgment. A technology entrepreneur engaged her in a fascinating discussion about waste reduction in manufacturing. An environmental lawyer asked detailed questions about recycling regulations. A retired teacher praised her commitment to education and community service. Cass found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with people who looked past her occupation to see her intelligence and passion. Between social obligations, she caught glimpses of Victoria watching from across the room, her expression growing, darker with each passing moment. Cass tried to ignore the attention, focusing instead on the immediate interactions, but the weight of that hostile gaze was difficult to dismiss entirely. Dinner was announced, and guests moved toward assigned tables. Theo guided Cass to a table near the front, where place cards indicated they would be seated with several of his closest friends. Nathaniel Foster was already there, Theo's assistant and longtime friend. He stood as they approached, his warm smile immediately putting Cass at ease. "You must be the famous Cassandra," Nate said, shaking her hand enthusiastically. "Theo has been mysteriously vague about how you two met, which makes me incredibly curious. It involved an aluminum can, a very expensive car, and questionable decision-making on both our parts," Cass replied, earning a delighted laugh from Nate. The dinner progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Cass navigated the confusing array of silverware by watching Theo and following his lead. The food was exquisite, though the portions were laughably small. She found herself wondering how much this single meal cost per person and how many families could be fed with that same amount. Midway through the main course, Victoria rose from her table and moved to the small stage where the quartet had been playing. She accepted a microphone from the event coordinator, her smile radiant as she surveyed the room. The conversations gradually quieted as guests turned their attention forward. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Victoria began, her voice warm and gracious. "Julian and I are overwhelmed by your love and support as we begin this new chapter together." Polite applause rippled through the room. Victoria waited for silence before continuing, her gaze deliberately finding Theo's table. "You know, finding true love is rarely easy. Sometimes we have to experience disappointment and heartbreak before we find the right person. I'm grateful for every experience that led me to Julian, even the difficult ones. They taught me what I truly deserved." The implication was clear to anyone paying attention. Theo was the difficult experience, the disappointment she had overcome. Several guests glanced toward their table, gauging his reaction. Theo's expression remained carefully neutral, but Cass saw the muscle tightening in his jaw. Victoria was not finished. "I've learned that authenticity is everything in relationships. You cannot build a future on pretense or performance. Real love requires two people who genuinely belong together, who come from the same world and share the same values." Another pointed glance toward Cass, another layer of calculated cruelty. Victoria was weaponizing her speech, using the celebration of her engagement to publicly humiliate both Theo and his guest. The message was unmistakable. Cass did not belong here, and everyone knew it. Anger rose in Cass's chest, hot and sudden. She had endured condescension all evening with grace, but this public attack crossed a line. Before she could fully consider the wisdom of her actions, she stood up. The sudden movement drew attention, heads turning to see what was happening. Theo reached for her arm, but she was already moving. Cass walked toward the stage with steady confidence, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The room fell absolutely silent. Victoria's eyes widened with surprise and alarm as Cass climbed the steps and approached her. For a moment, it seemed like a confrontation was inevitable. Instead, Cass simply smiled and gently took the microphone from Victoria's unresisting hands. "Thank you, Victoria, for that heartfelt speech," Cass said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I hope you don't mind if I add a brief thought." She turned to face the assembled guests, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I'm Cassandra Monroe, and I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to offer relationship advice. I work in recycling, which means I spend my days sorting through things other people have thrown away. But that work has taught me something valuable. People discard perfectly good things all the time because they don't recognize their worth. They see something that looks ordinary or imperfect and assume it has no value." Cass paused, letting her words settle. The truth is, value isn't determined by appearances or by what world you come from. It's determined by substance, by character, by what you offer when nobody is watching. I may not belong in rooms like this, but I know my worth. And I hope everyone here knows theirs too, regardless of what anyone else thinks. She handed the microphone back to Victoria, whose face had gone pale. The applause started slowly. One person clapping, then another, building into a wave of approval that was far more enthusiastic than Victoria's speech had received. Cass returned to her seat, her legs shaking with adrenaline. Theo stared at her with something close to awe. "That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever witnessed." "Probably both," Cass admitted, reaching for her water glass with trembling hands. Nate leaned across the table. "I think I love you. Can we be best friends?" The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Guests approached their table throughout the evening, many offering compliments on Cass's speech. Even people who had initially seemed dismissive now engaged, her with genuine interest and respect. She had transformed from a curiosity into someone worth knowing. Victoria maintained her distance, but her fury was evident in every tight smile and forced laugh. Julian seemed more bemused than angry, occasionally glancing at Cass with an expression that suggested reluctant admiration. As the evening wound down, Theo and Cass found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The party continued, inside, but the music was muted, the voices distant. Cool night air provided relief from the warmth of the crowded ballroom. "Thank you," Theo said quietly, leaning against the railing beside her. "For everything tonight. For standing up for yourself. For that incredible speech. For being exactly who you are. I think I may have made things worse for you," Cass replied, staring out at the glittering skyline. "Victoria looked like she wanted to murder me." "Victoria wanted to humiliate us both. You turned it around completely. Half the room is probably searching for you on social media right now." Cass laughed despite herself. "Good luck with that. I don't even have social media." Theo turned to face her more fully. "Can I ask you something personal? You're paying me $5,000? I think that earns you one personal question. Why did you really agree to this? The money is obviously important, but I don't think that's the only reason." Cass considered the question, searching for honest words. "Because you looked at me. When we met, when I was just a person in work clothes pushing a recycling cart, you actually saw me. Most people don't, and I thought maybe if I came here, I could prove to myself that being seen was possible. That I could exist in a space like this and not disappear. You didn't just exist, Theo said softly. You commanded the room. You made everyone else seem smaller by comparison. Their eyes met, and Cass felt something shift in the air between them. This was supposed to be transactional, temporary, a single evening of pretense. But the way Theo was looking at her felt dangerously real. The connection humming between them was not something that could be faked or bought. Before either could speak again, Nate appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but we should probably go. Victoria's friend Jennifer is asking pointed questions about Cass's background. Nothing good will come from sticking around. Theo nodded reluctantly. You're right. Let's get out of here. They made their goodbyes and slipped out through a side entrance, avoiding the main crowd. The car was waiting, and soon they were driving. Through the city streets, the party receding behind them. Cass leaned back against the leather seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her. I'll have the payment transferred to you tomorrow, Theo said. And Cass, if you ever need anything, I mean it. Business advice, connections, whatever your recycling education program needs, I want to help. That wasn't part of our deal. No. But I'm making it part anyway. What you said tonight about knowing your worth, that resonated with me. I want to support people who actually create value instead of just performing wealth. The car stopped outside Cass's apartment building, humble and worn compared to the luxury they had just left. Theo walked her to the door, his hands in his pockets. This was supposed to be simple, Cass said softly. One evening, then back to normal life. Nothing about tonight was simple, Theo replied. And I'm not sure either of us can go back to normal after this. He was right, though neither fully understood yet how profoundly the evening had changed them. As Cass climbed the stairs to her apartment, she felt like someone caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The party was over, but its echoes would continue long after the champagne glasses were cleared and the roses wilted. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, immediately calling Ruby to share everything. But even as she recounted the details, her mind kept returning to the moment on the balcony, to the way Theo had looked at her when she admitted why she had agreed to come one evening. That was all it was supposed to be, but endings and beginnings sometimes look remarkably similar, and Cass had the unsettling feeling she was standing at a threshold she had not anticipated crossing.